Do you speak any Japanese? How's that all, the communication going in general?
Granted, that's on me. I mean, if you go to a new place, you shouldn't assume they'll speak any language other than their own. And one of the reasons I'm here is I do want to learn Japanese. Having said that, my knowledge is incredibly limited.
Mm.
But there are people here, Aussies, Americans who do know Japanese. And to answer your question, there's one guy who is helping me on the phone get my internet contract set up. And everything here takes about an hour minimum to get done. There's just so much paperwork and protocol, and they really love going through the motions. And they had guaranteed me that a guy would come between certain hours on Saturday to come set the internet up. I heard them state it on the phone several times. I heard my buddy confirm it. And so, on Saturday, I'm waiting all day for that to happen, and the guy never showed up. And I can't really call to express this because I don't have the vocabulary to express this. And so even if I tried to call, there's not really anything I could say to them or anything I could take in from them answering me. And so this was another kerfuffle of them claiming, oh, we never said a guy was going to come. We thought you set up another option. And I had someone else, a Japanese person, translate for me, but I'm pretty sure they weren't translating what I wanted them to say. They're very non-confrontational. And I said, no. I want them to know I'm angry. Like, please tell them I wasted my Saturday. I'm angry and I want my internet set up. And I was like catching every third or fourth word, and it wasn't what I was telling him to say. I mean, as you can see, my internet is here, but I've been here for over a month without internet, and that was rough.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just hearing you kind of recount that. My brain was like, you just need to learn the Japanese word for like dishonor or like honor culture, and kind of just say that. Of like, come on, I thought that this is something that you guys put on upon a pedestal, and you've let me down. It could be someone kind of like forgetting your side order at a restaurant, or not giving you internet for a few weeks, and you could just kind of like say, well, I've heard the stories, guys. This is apparently important for you. So if you want to kind of uphold this cultural reputation, I'm going to need my internet fucking tomorrow.
There was
throw it on them.
The way I see it, people here, they go above and beyond to try to help you, but they don't actually help anything. Like
it's theater. It's like help
yeah.
theater.
They don't do anything. I was at a little mini mart and I just asked a guy if they had shampoo, and he almost had a panic attack. And he was going through shelf, like through every single item, and there was no shampoo. He knew there was no shampoo, but he had to go through the song and dance to, show that he was looking for it and that he was so upset that he couldn't help me. I mean, these are first world problems. There's so many worse things there are, but this is new for me, so I like to complain, and it's fun to complain.
To kind of segue and kind of like to slide into your topic, another kind of like cultural reputation that Japan has is to be kind of xenophobic and isolationist, and so I'm curious, kind of like what are the, specifically in relation to your pitch with Yang, but what are the kind of like how do Japanese people think of Koreans these days?
I think we're living in an interesting time where Korean media is so prominent, not just in Asia but everywhere, where a lot of people's go-to examples for like a famous actor, a famous singer, a handsome person is someone from a K-pop band or an actor from some K-drama. I can't speak super well on this topic because I just haven't been here long enough. And Japanese people as a whole, they don't really share their opinions about much. You try to get anything out of them, and it's all so vague. But I will say Korean media is extremely popular here, especially K-dramas, especially with females. Most of my female coworkers, I ask, what movies do you watch? What shows do you watch? And it's always some K-drama on Netflix.
Yeah. I I'm not sure if you're familiar. There's a comedian, Bobby Lee, who's American Korean, Korean American. You can have it either way, I guess. But he was talking about because his parents were born in Korea and moved to the States, and they had a clothing store in California somewhere. And so he was talking about how they would kind of racially profile the people that came in. And he was talking about the pedestal upon which Koreans would place other races of people. And he said that like number one was Korean. And he actually said that like despite all the historical baggage that like Japanese was 2 and like Chinese was 3, just because I guess it's probably like they're closest to Korean, or they like share the work ethic or kind of the many of the cultural similarities. And so it's an interesting thing where you're like, there's definitely kind of like some very specific and probably warranted historical kind of like bad stuff that's lingering, but yet the people within Asia, within the region, it seems like the kind of like shared etiquette values and the kind of like the focus on family and career and all that will still be more important than how they would look upon kind of like a lazy Australian who's going to take a gap year and smoke a bong, make out with his bong for 6 months or whatever. So I found that interesting because just the way it was told to me was that like, oh, if you think that like Trump fans are racist, what about Japanese people who don't let anyone in the country? And it's like, well, there is I guess if it's statistically, if you want to take that argument, perhaps there's something there. But when I did a bit further digging, it seemed like you'd have to really push someone on kind of like something that happened 100 years ago to get them angry, like a Japanese person, the average Japanese person, to get them angry about a Chinese or a Korean person in their vicinity. That's my kind of broad, completely uneducated take about it.
There's always that white guy who's like, I'm just calling it like I see it. I'm not racist. They're the true racist. First of all, years of isolationism, years of a completely different set of values and ideas and beliefs. And I don't even know where to start. There's such a difference between a multi-ethnic society where some people have, been on a lower status than others and they interrelate, whereas Japan, it is a mostly homogenous country. But it's not because they were like, oh shit, those Africans, I don't like those guys. It's like, no, they just didn't have contact with them. They didn't have any historical relations with them. So that argument.
And the same white girl will go like, well, there's a reason for that we're keeping them at. Yeah, it's funny. You can spin it whichever way. It's like a choose your own adventure. Politics is ridiculous. You can just pick whatever. You can reverse engineer your opinion and then find anything to kind of back up what you want to believe.
I mean, I'm not going to try to rationalize why a white supremacist thinks what he thinks.
That's why I've had you on today. Yeah, let's get
David can give his thoughts.
Yeah.
But they so often, they'll spew their nonsense, but they always praise the East Asians. Like, they did it right. They showed that living in a homogenous society is the way to do it. It's just stop there. It's apples and oranges. It's not the same thing. It's not a debate. But what's interesting about the Korean question is because historically, it almost seems so one-sided, where there's so much Korean resentment towards the Japanese as well as Chinese resentment towards the Japanese, basically a lot of Asia, whereas the Japanese aren't even aware of this. They're not aware of the resentment against them. They're not aware of the historical atrocities enacted by their ancestors, because they just don't learn about this in school. It's not a part of their teaching. Whereas in the U.S. and other Western countries, it's kind of beaten into our head. It's like, hey, we've done a lot of terrible shit. This is what we did to who. This is how they feel about us now. In Japan, from what I've seen, not from a lot, but from multiple sources, from people who live here, Japanese and Western alike, the way the Second World War is taught in history, it's relegated to about 2 sentences in the history book. It's the 20th century was a time of imperial advancements. All countries were trying to grab land, and eventually the Japanese Empire collapsed. That's kind of it. There's no details, there's no dates, there's no explanations on, well, why did that happen? What were you doing? How were you doing it?
Yeah, that's funny. That's almost like the opposite of the Germans. The Germans, they get it rammed down their throat by themselves about how bad they were, and yeah, it's like ultimate education compared to two sentences. So that's interesting. But yeah, like yourself, I was someone who's kind of always been in always been fascinated by World War II, and so I'm pretty familiar with all the kind of moving kind of parts of this particular story, Yang's story. But yeah, the specific something that I'm kind of interested in digging into is the kind of the first part of the story, the Korean Japanese conflict, about how we kind of got co-opted by Japan and taken prisoner and involved in that first war with the Soviets. But why don't I kind of throw to you and you just talk us through the main beats of the Yang story. I'm calling him Yang, even though I believe that's his last name because I don't want to attempt Yang Kyoungjong.
I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on Korean pronunciation either. I'm more than positive I'm going to butcher it. But yeah, as far as Germany is concerned, there's an embarrassment of riches when it comes to movies, literature, just stories from the German, part of World War II, whether it's the German perspective or the Allied perspective. It's hard to get good, authentic resources from the Japanese side.
Yeah.
Because one, it's either not published in the West, they didn't write about it, or not a lot of Japanese people survived the Second World War, soldiers that is. Historically and famously, they didn't really surrender. So that's what makes this story interesting, because the beats are there and almost nothing else. So there's a lot of filling in the blanks. And before I get to how I would pitch a movie, I'll explain how I heard about this story. So I've been obsessed with the Second World War ever since I was a teenager. I watched Band of Brothers. I don't know if you ever saw that one.
Yeah, I saw that one. That was great.
It got me obsessed, and so I read as many books as I could. I saw as many movies as I could, as many documentaries as I could find. And during the early days of COVID, where people thought just stepping outside you would suffocate and die, I ordered a lot of books because I had nothing but time. And one book was from a pretty famous World War II historian named Anthony Beevor, who's written endless amount of books about the Second World War. And finally, he just wrote this massive behemoth of a book called The Second World War. And the opening chapter of it, and I'll just read it off. It's only about a paragraph. In June 1944, a young soldier surrendered to American paratroopers in the Allied invasion of Normandy. At first, his captors thought he was Japanese, but he was in fact Korean. His name was, forgive me, Korean speakers, Yang Kyoungjong. In 1938, at the age of 18, Young had been forcibly conscripted by the Japanese into the Kyoungjong army in Manchuria. A year later, he was captured by the Red Army after the Battle of... This paragraph, by the way, is for people who have trouble pronouncing words, a form of dyslexia, or are bad at articulation. This is just a nightmare. He was captured by the Red Army after the Battle of Khalkhin-Gol and sent to a labor camp. The Soviet military authorities, at a moment of crisis in 1942, drafted him along with thousands of other prisoners into their forces. Then, early in 1943, he was taken prisoner by the German army at the Battle of Kharkiv in Ukraine. In 1944, now in German uniform, he was sent to France to serve with the Ost Battalion, supposedly boosting the strength of the Atlantic Wall at the base of the Continental Peninsula, inland from Utah Beach. After time in a prison camp in Britain, he went to the United States, where he said nothing of his past. He settled there and finally died in Illinois in 1982. Other accounts we could find suggest he died in 1992. The story was okay. That's the end of the paragraph. But basically, Beaver uses that at the beginning of the book just to set out how truly insane the scale of this conflict was, but also what it did to the average human, that someone could be thrown around to so many different camps and be on so many different sides of the conflict, and just how absurd the whole thing is.
Mm.
And I don't know, I'm just picturing it from his point of view, fighting on Omaha Beach or Utah Beach, wherever it was, probably not quite understanding what the conflict was and against who it was. I mean, as far as he was concerned, the Japanese were the overlords when he grew up because Korea was a part of Imperial Japan at that time. And then
Yeah.
suddenly he's in Russia, he's in France, and then he's in the UK. I could only imagine what was going on in his mind, to the point that I don't even think it's quite comprehensible.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the kind of commit that the fact he's not understanding the language. He's on Omaha Beach, and it's kind of like, the age-old joke in terms of white people think all Asian people look the same. Like maybe it cuts the other way as well. And he's like on the beach, and he's like, "Whose team? These people should be all on the same team," type of vibe. And then, yeah, it's just crazy. But kind of to try and get in his mindset in respect to the Japanese are the overlords. So he was young. He was like 18 when it kicks off in 1945, right? Was he 18 then? No, that's the end of the
So
war.
18 in, I think, 1938 or 1940.
Yeah. Okay. And
So
so
young.
like would he have spent how long is there a period in his life where the kind of Korean this is my ignorance about this particular part of the kind of, well, I guess the pre-World War II conflict is like, is from birth, have the Japanese been his overlords, or was there a period in time where he had kind of a separate Korean identity based on your kind of understanding of everything here?
To the best of my recollections, Korea was a part of the Japanese Empire starting in the late 1800s,
Mm.
early 20th century for sure, but maybe even the late 1800s. So he would have grown up, if not from birth, then definitely from childhood, with Korea as a subject of Japan.
Yeah.
So not having really sovereign identity of its own.
Okay, that's interesting. So it's not like the Japan would have taken over Korea when he was like 10 years old or whatever. So he was like, "Oh, I remember what it was like when we were free." He's always been a prisoner. That's even fun. That's kind of like that's it's like a part of his identity essentially, whether he realized it or not.
I mean, it's even entirely possible he grew up thinking it was the good thing, like to be patriotic and support the Japanese, that these are the people who provide for us. Like, we're great because of Imperial Japan. We have to do our duty to fight for Japan. And that's why, if this were to be a movie, it could go in so many different directions because there's the beats of his life, but all the details that make a story interesting, they're not there. And what's strange about World War II is there's people who are there who are still alive now, our grandfathers, our great grandfathers. So more so than other historical events where there's certain layers of removal there, where you don't feel so bad playing loose with history. World War II is a bit different because some of these people are still alive. So if
Mm.
someone, was known amongst his peers as a good person, but then the movie adaptation, you write him as a huge prick, like, you might feel kind of bad about that. But with this person's life, I just think there's so much potential to go in so many different directions. And I'm going to try to get like a clear point across here. But I'll say what I wouldn't want to do, and that's the Forrest Gump approach. It'd be very easy to do that, make it overly sentimental and cheesy and having him shape all these important events. I'm so over sentimental biopics. They all look the same. They all feel the same. I feel like there's
Mm.
nothing new to really add there.
Well, yeah, this is actually to kind of go off on a slight tangent here. This is something that I've tried to articulate to a few people about creating narratives or writing, and this is kind of a good opportunity to plug. David's the author of CoinciDATE, great book from 2020, right? Or 2021, sorry. Started 21.
It's all a blur.
Yeah. And then only a couple months back, his follow-up collection of short stories, SCHLOCK, came out, which I'm still yet to read. Once now my life is settled, I'll get into that. But
there's better books to read. You're fine.
Yeah, no, I feel this. You have to do the plug, but I understand the sentiment when you kind of like when someone apologizes they haven't read your book. I'm like, yeah, I feel like a teacher almost. I've set the world some extra homework. I'm like, hopefully it's kind of cool homework, but it's still homework regardless. So no, I feel your pain there, but it's David's a great writer, so you got to do the plugs. But
cheers.
So the but something that I've thought about in relation to, you mentioned Forrest Gump, when you write stories, like let's say you have this main character, and sometimes in your life things happen to you that are really important, and you're like on the scene. You come home and your partner's screwing another person and you catch it firsthand. There's a shocking moment that has a visceral impact on a character. And then there's sometimes things that like important things that will happen where you'll get a text message when you're on a flight, and so you'll land 12 hours later and you'll get onto airport Wi-Fi, and then that's when the message will come through of your husband telling you that you're leaving you. You know what I mean? Like, it could be a similar thing where the end result is a breakup, and then one is kind of this sock to the face, visceral punch, and the other one is kind of this the way the information has trickled down through various mediums finally reaches you, and it could be hours or days later. And so I hate fucking stories where the main character keeps stumbling upon the main action, and they process it in real time and figure out, okay, this is how this impacts me, and then they move on to the next, like setting up the next conflict or like so.
I can't believe it. I'm at Normandy. This is this, and it might not feel like it, but I'm sure this is going to be a big deal later on. And
yeah,
that's.
But that's the challenge though, because you know like I want when I write I want an element of realism, and I want but I also kind of want to not make it completely boring and completely like everyday life where you get very few of those really exciting moments. So it's kind of do you think about that when you create your stuff in terms of what stuff should the main character see versus like what should important stuff should get trickled down to them in perhaps a less Hollywood way?
I think I might be the wrong person to ask, because this isn't a joke. I am a hack. Like I am a fraud, and I will go out of my way to sabotage my own story if I know it will make one person laugh and everyone else thinks it's complete shit. So I don't want to spoil it too much, but my current book is called SCHLOCK. That should tell you everything you need to know about what kind of stories you're getting. But there's still people who complained about how absurd certain parts got. And when I hear that, I'm thinking, so what you're telling me is it wasn't absurd enough. Like in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, it wasn't stupid enough. Because I like my favorite movies, my favorite comedians are people who will take a joke that wasn't good to begin with. It's so stupid and so lazy, but they will run it into the ground to such a degree that it ends up being kind of genius. And I think that's something Sacha Baron Cohen is really great at. He'll take something that is so, and he's a genius, but sometimes not every joke he has lands, but he does it anyways, and he won't stop when it wasn't funny 10 minutes ago. It's not funny now, but he'll just keep taking it to the nth degree. And that's kind of something I like to do as well. Maybe everyone else finds it obnoxious and hates it. That's fine. But To your original question, I'm truly not the right person to ask about that because in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, the character just finds out his mother has cancer. What's the stupidest reaction he could have? Like, not what's the realistic reaction, what's the smart reaction, what's the good storytelling reaction? What's like the most retarded thing he could do in this situation? And that's kind of where my mind goes.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I'm thinking back to CoinciDATE though, because that's kind of like a story about with a revolving cast of characters who bump into one another and kind of push their conflicts onto each other. And yeah, I would say that you did that. I wouldn't say that was completely there was some I didn't I didn't see some of the interactions coming. It is the compliment I would pay you, because in some of those kind of situational comedies, you're kind of like, oh, the conflict happens and you see how it's gonna lead to other stuff. So I would think you're perhaps doing yourself a little disservice there, because there was still the element of surprise, albeit in an absurdist setting. So that's for me, because that's the thing. I'm willing to go along with the joke, but I kind of don't want the next joke ruined for me just because it feels like a waste of time. Then it's like, oh, I've got to kill 30 pages until I get to the next thing, which I already can see coming. So there's got to be the fun surprise.
You're right about that. And I do appreciate your comments. And I guess I think what I'm saying is sometimes people, they treat like a comedic moment as if it's a comedic moment. And I know that sounds kind of nonsensical, but comedy happens sometimes in the most dire situations or vice versa. And I mean, I think a great example of that is The Sopranos. On paper, that show's not a comedy. However, that's probably the funniest show I've ever seen in my life. Like,
yeah,
the darkest shit is happening. The most awful, insane stuff is happening. And intertwined in that is some of the funniest things I remember ever seeing on TV. And you've seen The Sopranos?
Oh, dude, Matt, it's like perhaps my number one. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Huge
so
fan.
Do you remember, spoilers for a 20-year-old show, but when Tony has just killed Ralph Cifaretto and he calls
Chris, and he's on heroin.
Get rid of the body. And it's morbid. They're cutting a dead man's body up who just minutes ago was their friend, their colleague. And the blood and the murder is not what bothers Chris. It's when he's pulling and the guy's wig comes off and it freaks him out. And he just can't get past it for the next 10 minutes. He's talking about the wig. He's like, oh my God, did you know he was bald?
Yeah. I saw this comedian, Joe List, talk about, because he doesn't like TV. He doesn't like the format of TV. And he was saying that the thing that annoyed him about The Sopranos was that it'd be kind of this gritty kind of mob life. And then the two characters that he detested, which took him out of it, were Paulie Walnuts and what's the little Steven from the E Street Band, his 2IC. His name? Sil, yeah. He said he didn't like them because they were too A-D, and they were
part of the show.
I know, and I didn't think it was a fair. I didn't think it was a fair aspersion, because I've lived on the East Coast, and there are Italian Americans who dress ridiculous.
Yes.
Everything they say is ridiculous, and I'll never forget. I was in where the fuck was I? I went to Bermuda once on vacation, and there was this Italian American family where they had the loudest voices I've ever fucking come across. It like you could be 50 feet away, and then they would just like be able to send their sentence to your ear hole, and they were just so entertaining to watch and listen to. And so the dad was the loudmouth, of course, and they had like an 8-year-old son who was already kind of like a little soprano in training, and he bumped into some kids at this little water park who he hadn't seen since yesterday. He was like, "Hey guys, good to see you. I'll be over in a minute." And he was just like, "Oh my God, you're it was just the evolution was happening before my eyes. So yeah, no, I agree. The Sopranos was I guess the perfect balance of that kind of like hardcore, dark, existentialist, there is no meaning, coupled with just lewd jokes and kind of like people's personality defects being highlighted to the nth degree. So yeah, that's the dance that I think is appeals to me a lot as well with movies and TV.
And I guess like to kind of condense it, the worst thing is someone trying to be funny and not being funny. Like some things either it's not
Deep.
science. There's no science.
That's what keeps me up at night.
Yeah, it's either funny or it's not. And The Sopranos, it nails it. It is the funniest show I've ever seen, and so is The Wire. I mean, to a lesser extent, because The Wire is a bit more grounded than The Sopranos. But again, there's outrageously funny moments in that show, which is a very heavy, depressing show.
Yeah. So to go back to Young, I was calling him Yang before.
Who knows? Right.
Yeah. So somewhere in the middle. But so with Young, we don't want to do the Forrest Gump. We don't want to go full Gump. but his life story is kind of Gumpish. So how do you tackle that? Like let's take the first kind of major transition in respect to the story. Like he's getting taken prisoner by the Soviets. Like how does that go down in this hypothetical movie in your mind?
You know how every writing teacher, writing book, they'll tell you your protagonist must be active. You can't have a passive protagonist. I mean, that makes sense if you're trying to write, for lack of a better word, a generic story that looks and feels like a story. But a talented writer can make anything work. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Glengarry Glen Ross.
Yeah. Coffee's for closers, baby.
On paper, it sounds incredibly boring, but it's one of the most compelling movies ever because the acting and the dialogue is so good. So in this movie, the way I would do it, Young would be passive. He's just kind of experiencing things, not fully understanding them, but that would be a way to paint the world around him. So I would do it in 4 parts. And the first part would be in Korea-occupied Japan. Mm-hmm. And I would really focus on Japanese soldiers, Japanese officers who are stationed there, and just paint them as like outlandishly, patriotic, full of bravado, xenophobia, and they think they're untouchable. And because in their minds they grew up with this mentality that they're these untouchable, righteous things, everyone else is below them and they can take what they want. And one of the more horrific parts of the war in Korea and East Asia is the Japanese would take comfort women, so the local women, whether it be China, but mostly Korea, and force them into sex slavery for the officers and the politicians and whoever was in control of the regions. And I think there's a lot of things you could do there with this kind of plot line. And I haven't even really mentioned Young yet. He's there, but I almost think like of him more as a passive character who just kind of goes from place to place that allows you to view propaganda and view soldiers from different parts of the world during the war. And I almost see this movie as like a showcase of propaganda. I think propaganda is super interesting. One of my favorite movies is Starship Troopers. Did you see that one?
I saw that like a long time ago, and so I've just got little pockets of memories, but no, I haven't seen it in a long time.
One of the fun things about that movie is people completely misinterpreted it. They thought it was like a straightforward, serious movie about Marines fighting aliens. And the whole movie is like a very, very, like, not even subtle satire about fascist propaganda. Like, the humans in that movie, the heroes, are fascists. They're essentially space Nazis. And it's a really funny movie. Paul Verhoeven's a great director, and he's great with satire. And I'm kind of thinking of a tone like that, like a very satirical tone but it plays it straight just to show like what levels of depravity people could go when they buy into the propaganda.
Well, yeah, I was thinking in terms of the comedy of the story, kind of like as we touched on before, like this guy almost has a prisoner destiny from birth, and that he could kind of like when he gets captured in like the dumbest ways, where his kind of band of brothers are like, all right, young, it's time to run now, but like in the moment he becomes kind of like glassy eyed, and he just can't stop observing some absurdist aspect of the kind of the patriotism, or the kind of the conditioning, and the kind of the ridiculousness of war kind of overcomes him, and he almost becomes emotional and catatonic, where he's observing something. And maybe you could have some kind of like his kind of like diary entries as all this, like his friends are escaping and just get the obvious way out, but he's overcome by the scene, and he can't tear himself away, and so he gets captured in kind of the most obvious ways, because that way you can kind of have the comedy of him just not taking the easy way out and escaping, but then you'd be able to kind of have an opportunity to if like he's a introverted character, but on the inside he's kind of got this appreciation for the esoteric ridiculousness of life. You could kind of use those captured moments to kind of like get inside that man's soul, and him feeling kind of like, yeah, almost like a willing captive in a sense. Like I feel like I've always been captive, and humans are captive of God, and like you could take it in so many where he's almost kind of like a prophet, where the soldiers are the ones who think they are victorious because they're killing and escaping and doing all that stuff, but he's kind of got this realization that you're always carrying water for someone, and why not carry water for someone interesting, and have a few kind of wild. Maybe the first capture is kind of like accidental because he gets swept up in it, but then you could kind of from there he's kind of putting himself in a position where he doesn't want to die, but he just wants to have very interesting kind of experiences, so therefore that would lead to him getting in more dicey situations from there.
Well, that's what's interesting. The way you said it's almost like his destiny to get captured, because he was born essentially a captive.
Yeah.
And in his mind, it's like that's what he's meant to do. And there's so many places you could take this character. You could either make him gung-ho, you could make him a coward, you could make him competent, you could make him a bumbling idiot. And that would kind of dictate where the story goes and what the tone is. I'm all about the absurd. Showing World War II is called the good war, but there's no such thing. It's all bad. And the more you think about it, it is absurd, and it is funny. It is hilarious. I mean, it's fucking awful, but it's hilarious that these things happen. And I think lean into that. Don't copy Inglourious Bastards because you can't, but that's a movie that really nailed the tone of showing that a really dark movie, about the Holocaust can be funny. Like you can have funny moments in that movie. And I think this is the ultimate example to do that, because you get to see propaganda in the war from the Japanese side, from the Soviet side, from the German side. And they're all different but similar, because it's propaganda at the end of the day is getting Group A to hate Group B, or getting Group A to do your bidding.
Yeah, I like the kind of concept of you could have kind of a final act in the movie of his kind of like quote unquote free life in America, where you could show him that like, okay, he's supposedly free, but then he still has like a boss. He has like a horrific Alec Baldwin. Yeah, you could have a Glengarry, Glenn Ross, Alec Baldwin type of dude who's riding him at work, and then like maybe an ex-wife who's chasing up child support payments, and but he's still kind of got this like, well, this is my destiny, this is what I have to deal with, and then you could kind of also show that like in times of freedom, and these people these Americans who fought with one another as a team, but then they'll go back to America and be like, well, I'm from Georgia, you're from Florida, I hate your fucking guts with college football. And like, the tribalism that exists within society, within families, and how the conflict is always within us. Sometimes it just gets realized and hardened with a global conflict, but the informal conflict amongst humans is kind of is eternal. And so his perspective would be like just to still be kind of like a POW in it would be extra funny in like 50s America, where everything is supposedly the MAGA people would have you believe it was this time of paradise where everyone could knock it out of the park in every metric of their life, but he's still getting fucked over. Maybe you'd have to do it later in his life to show that by that point he should have acclimatized to the culture and should have learned some language and should be winning, but he's still getting fucked over, but okay with it. That would be the ultimate comedy.
Tempted to treat that final act like the most dramatic part of his life too, because I imagine the movie in 4 parts: the Japanese part, the Soviet part, the German part, and then his life in America, and treat the final 30, 40, however many minutes it is, about him dealing with his boss and his wife in American suburbia as like the most heavy thing he's ever dealt with. Like everything until that was like wine and coke. But it's like, what is this bullshit? Who are these Karens? Like, what is this?
Yes.
Who are these people complaining about lawns and what is going on?
Totally. Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. His kind of cool as a cucumber thing starts to crack at that point. Just kind of talking this through, it's weird. The kind of vibe reminds me a little bit of I don't think it was their last. I think it was their second last movie, the Coen Brothers, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Did you see that one?
I only saw that was the anthology one, right?
Correct. Yeah.
I saw the first 2 or 3, and it was good. It's just one of those things where other things happened and I never finished it, but I liked what I saw.
Yeah. No. It was kind of I guess it was I think it was like general theme of death or throughout them all, but yeah, it kind of had this absurdist angle where they were just kind of exploring kind of like some strange situation in each kind of in each little story within the anthology. But in terms of like if we were gonna if someone was gonna be like, David and Thommy, here's $100 million, put this together tomorrow, which people are you getting involved? So
even if they were to give me $100 million, once they find out who I'm giving it to, they would take it back. So the director who I genuinely think would do the best job with this movie is a Japanese filmmaker named Shion Sono. And it's hard to exactly articulate why this guy is so amazing, but there's certain artists out there, they try to be the weird and zany artists, but it's always obvious when they're trying to be weird. It's kind of like someone who's a naturally good dancer and someone who's like actively studied dancing tutorials, and technically they know the steps, but you could see in their eyes they're not having fun. They're like actively thinking like, now I do this, now I do that. There's nothing worse than someone trying to be something. And I'm not going to name names, but there's certain directors who are famous because they're so weird and kooky, and I just think, well, they're a hack. They're trying to be weird. They're not really weird. Shion Sono is probably a murderer. He's probably killed people. He's a pervert. He's an insane person. He's not a normal person. I love his movies. I would not want to be in the same room as him. And his movies are from another planet. They truly feel like they're made by an alien. His most famous movie is 4 fucking hours long. And it doesn't feel it, though. It is the most fast-paced, like, engaging movie I've ever seen. It's extremely cartoonish, but deadly serious. It's heartfelt and perverted beyond anything I've ever seen. It's absurd. It's got adult themes. It's childish. It literally is a movie about everything. It has every human emotion, and it's fun. There's action in it. There's comedy, and for a 4-hour movie, it never feels its length. And that's kind of how all his movies feel. He manages to get so many contrasting tones and emotions, where if anyone else were to try it, it would be a mess. But because I think he's not trying, I think that's actually how his brain processes the world. He would be the perfect person for a movie of this caliber, because you don't want it to feel like a World War II movie. You don't want it to feel like Saving Private Ryan. You don't want it to feel like Forrest Gump. It should be its own beast, because World War II's been done to death. There's really not much left to say about it. Like, we've seen the definitive stamp of World War II movies and what they can look like. So you really have to, I guess it's less about the Second World War and just about the human capacity to wage war and to wage hate and what propaganda can do to nations. I think that's kind of like the main draw there.
Mm. Yeah, I'm just looking him up on Wikipedia, and yeah, the thing is, first of all, great name, Sean Sono.
Great name, yeah. That's
amazing
name. Name.
Yeah, totally. And I've often found that, like, just following musicians and bands that I like and their kind of relationship with Japan. What you mentioned before in terms of whether you are a naturally, organically good dancer versus someone who decides, I want to be a good dancer. And so you learn it. So it's this thing that's imposed on your kind of character by yourself. I find that Japanese people, kind of like the Western culture, white guys get accused of fetishizing, particularly Asian women. I think it goes the other way in terms of Japanese people appreciating music and the way that they kind of fetishize the Beatles or something like that in respect to the way that they kind of present the art.
Someone ringing my door. I'm so sorry. It's like 8
It's the culture police. I was about to say something negative, so no worries. Take your time.
I'm so sorry. That was very bizarre. I got a package late at night, but all right, I'll see what that is later.
They're the best type of packages, the late night deliveries. But no, I guess I'm not sure if I really had a point. I'm basically saying that in a place like Japan where it seems like if you're going to be a weirdo, there's almost like a handbook for being a weirdo or like to getting into something. So whereas this Sean guy seems like he's like a genuine weirdo. Like if you can be an actual space cadet in a culture of like conformity, that it's so easy to be a weirdo in California or Australia. Like it's expected that there's a certain allotment of the population is like, you will be these people. Whereas someone who kind of really steps outside the norm and fucking is a fucking strange pervert, then that's the type of brain that you want on this type of project. So he seems like the man.
You don't want him raising your kids. You don't want him, being your friend. You don't want to be in the same room as him, but you want him to make your movie because it will be memorable. Even if it's a disaster, it will be memorably so. It won't be boring.
Yeah. And what are your whole thoughts in terms of I can't remember when I had the realization when you're watching some historical fiction movie and then they would always talk in a British voice, even if we're like, I'm Jesus of Nazareth, come follow me. And then I must have been, I'm giving myself more credit of how young I was, but I must have been 10 or 11 where I was like, hang on a fucking second. These people were speaking Aramaic or an early version of Greek or something. Like, why are they talking like they're from just outside of Londinium? Makes no fucking sense.
We accept it, don't we?
Yeah. So, but what are your thoughts in terms of, do you want the authenticity of getting the Koreans to speak Korean, the Japanese to speak Japanese, the Germans to speak German in this flick, or are we like there was that recent movie, I didn't see it, Jojo Rabbit, where it was like making fun of Hitler, and I think everyone were they speaking German in that? I'm not sure if you
They were
saw it.
speaking English, and not only that, but Hitler was played by a Kiwi, and Hitler had a Kiwi accent, which
Yeah.
does work for the comedy. For this one, I would go the Inglorious Bastards route, where each nationality speaks their language. I think it adds a level of authenticity. I mean, I don't know if this makes sense. This movie, I'm more interested in authenticity than accuracy because I don't think it's possible to be completely accurate. You'll never know were there 5 soldiers or 6 soldiers. Did he fire 2 shots or 3 shots? How many tanks were there? We can never possibly know that. But if it feels right, I think that's more important.
Yeah.
So, and I think the people speaking their own languages would add to the authenticity of that.
Yeah, just thinking it through, the fact that the comedic moments, things are lost in translation. Like initially, there are some people who speak his language at the Soviet Japanese handover, and then as he gets further away from that, he loses it. That it would have to be that type of vibe, but
Well,
yeah,
sorry to cut
fuck.
you off, but yeah, I just realized because in the beginning of that paragraph I read from Anthony Beaver, when the Americans took him prisoner, they thought he was Japanese. And I doubt he spoke German or English. So there's no way for him to even explain, no, I'm a Korean prisoner. They're just like, oh, he's a fucking Asian guy in a German uniform. Let's take his, Axis ass to prison. And I think I read that he was in prison in the UK for about 3 years until they finally let him go.
How do you, in terms of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, even calling it that feels like you're not calling a spade a spade. It's like Russia invaded Ukraine. Like that's what happened. And you've got a personal connection to the region. And when the conflict started on social media, you were posting and just kind of spreading the word like a lot of people were in respect to what was happening there. And then several months on, that's still happening. And so do you kind of when you think about these stories now, these kind of things of bygone eras, do you get more kind of clarity over what war is, or is it as murky as it is about what the actual kind of feeling? Because you're obviously not directly involved in Russia, Ukraine, but you've got some kind of by proxy connection. How do you feel? Are we evolving into new types of conflict that are being facilitated by the information age and the kind of propaganda that can be bought and sold by social media? Or is it literally the same type of shit that was happening in the Stone Age and then World War II? Are we kind of having the same conflict again and again with different names and faces, but the same shit?
I think there's more clarity, but in a cynical way. Whereas I think it's deceptively simple what war is, but I don't think it's ever going to change. I don't think we're ever going to reach a level where we're beyond it. We've become so enlightened. I mean, look at America. People are becoming so hateful of one another. Blue state, red state, whatever you want to call it. There is no one America. The people fucking despise one another, and that's not going to be bridged anytime soon. And I think war is just the result that even if you know you're wrong, if enough people agree with you and you like that belief, you'll fight for it. I think it's easier to fight for a lie than to admit a hard truth. And I think a lot of Russians deep down know they're wrong, but they'll never admit it. They'll never admit it because it's not convenient for them. And I think that's like war at its like most basic essence.
And what about I've listened to a lot of podcasts in respect to trying to understand what is the reasoning for Putin to go into Ukraine, like in terms of inside his own brain, like why would he do it? And then secondly, like what boots on the ground, how are people in Russia feeling? And one guy, I don't recall who it was, essentially said that when Putin came to power, the average Russian on the street, their standard of living was down here, and now fast forward 25 years or whatever it's been, it's improved. So he said life in Russia isn't perfect, but he says that just, across the board, aggregated sense of kind of like, has life been better since Putin came to power? His general impression has been yes for a lot of people. And so you put that in context with 100 years of turbulence and kind of falling out of having kind of the feudalism kind of royal thing, and then communism, all this shit that's occurred to them. And so just having 25 years of gradual improvement where they've clawed back a bit of kind of happiness and kind of wealth after like the dismal kind of 90s, that's meant a lot. And so they're like, he's not perfect, but we'll stick by him because he's given us this. Is that kind of, do you think that's fair in terms of what they're thinking, or is it all propaganda, all bullshit, all nationalistic jingoism?
I think to dismiss it wouldn't be honest. There's some level of truth in that, but it's like, what's better, being constipated or having explosive diarrhea? Like, neither's good, but you might have a preference on which one's.
Yeah.
Well, they're both shit.
That's a bumper sticker.
Russians like being told what to do. They like this illusion of a strong leader. They could have, no water in their city, busted pipes that don't work, the heat hasn't been on for months, there's potholes outside, there's no foods on the shelves, but the illusion of we're strong and united, that's more important to them than reality. They could be starving to death, but if Putin says, no, you're well fed, you're a patriot, you're fine, it's like, goddamn, you're right, I am. And, they'll believe that. Not all of them, but they're very susceptible to this kind of talk. I mean, no one thinks they're not exceptional, but Russia really does have this own sense of their own exceptionalism, their own uniqueness among the world. And Putin did pull them out of a chaotic 90s. And I guess stability, even if it's bad stability, might be more comfortable and preferable to people than chaos, because chaos is scary. From day to day, you don't know what to expect. Whereas with Russia now, there's kind of an expectation. It might not be good, but people know what is happening on a day-to-day basis. So where credit's due, Putin did that. And this is what's interesting about Putin. If he just let things be, if he just stepped down, which he never would, dictators don't, he would probably be remembered fondly, not just in Russia, but in other places. But this war has been a colossal disaster. I mean, Ukraine is the ultimate victim, but so is Russia. They've depleted so many of their resources. I think they've lost something like 4% of their military strength. If this war keeps going on, they are not going to have the ability to wage war in the future, which is a good thing. But they're at a point where they're not going to just say, we made a mistake, like, let's fall back, let's call it quits, admit defeat. They're going to go to the end, whether it's their end or, God forbid, Ukraine's end. But this is, Putin can't afford to lose, but he's not capable of winning either. And that's when someone like him is at their most dangerous. You don't know what they'll resort to doing.
Yeah, particularly as he's getting older and kind of potentially sick and not of sound mind. So anyway, but yeah, it's hilarious you say that Russians being told what to do, and it's like I would never tell a Russian what to do. I would be way too afraid. It seems like Russians being told what to do by a Russian or
yes,
someone
clarify.
Or someone who they deem to be a Russian, and it could all because I've heard lots of interesting commentary and something that's probably blatantly obvious to you, but pretty new to me. The whole concept of their identity is that they're between Asia and Europe. They're not Asian and they're not European. And so it could come across as exceptionalism, or from their perspective, they could see us like, well, the world doesn't want us. We have to stand up for ourselves because we've been rejected by both continents that surround us. So you can see how that's a very fertile ground for having people who are looking for a strong internal leader, and they are just not trusting of outside forces. So it seems like where we're at.
What it boils down to is Russia's Cartman. They're the Cartman of the world. And I don't know if you remember, they ordered fried chicken, and Cartman ate all the skin on the chicken before anyone else could have any. And then they got in and like, what the fuck? Like, you ate the best part. And he didn't understand why they were mad at him. And they decided to ignore him. They weren't going to talk to him anymore. And in Cartman's like selfish, delusional brain, he could not comprehend why they're angry. And that's kind of Russia. They're the person who like eats everyone else's food, like takes their belongings, and then they're like, hey, let's hang out, guys. And then they're surprised when their friends don't want to hang out.
Do you had personal connection to people in Ukraine and therefore like an interest in the region, and so I understand your connection there, but like I've made a point of kind of staying as apolitical as I possibly can in my life, just kind of out of a self-preservation tactic where I don't want to have to immediately dismiss someone because they're on the other team that I'm on. And I also I think that there's more beneficial things to think about and spend my time worrying about. And I've kind of got this, I don't know, it's almost like a hippie thing where it's like, if I take care of myself, my politics will take care of themselves as well, where it's like, if, I just have cool people around me, I'll pick up on cool ideas and other hippie buzzwords thrown in, but essentially kind of just being like purposefully aloof and standoffish from anything that's obviously political will put me in good stead, because these things are kind of just will take care of themselves. I guess because you've got this like personal connection to the war, do you think that kind of like I don't know, I could say it's a hippie ideal, but it's almost libertarian in a sense, where I'm just like standing outside of it, being like, no, I'll worry about me and those closest to me, and I won't play your game. Do you think that puts you in good stead, or should I be more political? Like, should I give a shit? Because eventually, the whole thing, you don't care about politics, but politics cares about you. Is this how poor fuckers like Young have been pulled into conflicts time and time again, because they were too busy not paying attention and didn't flee or perhaps get skilled up about how to protect themselves quicker? Where do you stand on kind of like, when should you take a stand compared to when should you just go with the breeze and see what happens?
I mean, that's a great way to like bring it back around to poor Young, and it really is poor Young. I'm a huge hypocrite. I used to, and to some extent I still do, would laugh at people who are super passionate about whatever the popular political debate was, or social debate was at any given moment. They'll post a couple memes about what they support, and they feel like they did their duty. And I would scoff at people like that until it became something personal. And so I understood, it's like, you know what? I can't expect everyone to care about something as much as I do, or vice versa. And the Ukraine war is extremely personal for me. And I'm not even going to put on airs that it's not. Like, I've gone out of my way to like show where I stand and to tell Russians how I feel. And I've lost 95% of my Russian friends, like just in a matter of the first day of the war. And fuck them. Like, they showed who they were. I showed who I was. I don't miss them. I don't have enough energy to save Russians, because a lot of my friends like, oh, I'm trying to change their minds, make them see the light. That's not going to happen. They believe what they want to believe. My energy is for the Ukrainian people, and there's fucking shockingly little I could do. I mean, I've donated money where I can and just hope it gets in, the right hands. Um,
Mm.
just, sharing articles doesn't do much other than make you feel better, make you feel like you did something. I don't know, but it's something that's on my mind 24/7. I'm never not thinking about it. I'm never not thinking about my friends who are still there. And I don't believe in God, but thank God they're okay. Thank
Mm.
God every person I know is accounted for and healthy. And the sad reality is not everyone can say that. A lot of those friends of mine have people who have been affected by this in a much worse way. I think what's strange about this war, this is really truly the first modern war. I mean, Iraq, Afghanistan, that was the 21st century, but that was pre-social media. That was pre-live streaming where everything is being uploaded in real time. We're seeing this war happen in real time, which is amazing and also adding to the stress of it all.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, well, I guess you sharing that stuff on social media, the only thing it achieved is making, you feel better. But it definitely got me hip to certain things that were happening and, you know, uh, swayed my opinion, well, not swayed, but kind of solidified my initial hunch in terms of like what I believe to be happening and kind of trying to cut through the propaganda. So I think virtual, even if you're just virtue signaling, you're still sending out a signal, and yeah, like other people can observe that signal and interpret that as they see fit. But what one yeah, something that I've often kind of grappled with, because the way social media is set up is that there's always something to be outraged about at any given moment. At the moment in the States, it's Roe v. Wade. 2 weeks ago, it was the Uvalde shooting. A year ago, or 2 years ago, it was George Floyd. Then it was Black Lives Matter. Like, there is always something to be offended by, and you can take on the mantle of being like, I'm going to be engaged and I'm going to be a part of every movement, and I'm going to like do my bit. Or, like I think about how I live my life. When I'm paranoid and scared, I catastrophize about every possible thing that could go wrong, and I worry about things before they happen. Sometimes things happen. Maybe the worrying is some type of like mental strength training, and it allows me to prepare for the issue if it comes to if it comes to pass. But I generally find that if I just try and pretend potential problems don't exist, because I guess they technically don't, go about my day, and when a problem comes along, I'm ready to kind of figure it out, and I'm generally in a healthy headspace to figure that out. So I've and this comes from an extreme place of privilege, in that not I don't have that many problems. So therefore, if I started to jump on the bandwagon of problems that don't directly affect me, I isn't that kind of augmenting or artificially enhancing the signal of something that I don't really have any understanding of, or I don't even have a real opinion of. I just have a hunch that, oh, this is the right way to be on this issue. So therefore, if it did affect me, I think I'd feel this way, but it doesn't affect me. If I'm being truly honest, it doesn't affect me. So do you worry about like these social media campaigns or kind of blitzes that occur? If people are, and I think it comes from a good place, people are trying to jump on board and be on the right side of history and all that stuff, but should you shut the fuck up if it doesn't directly affect you?
Or that, or shut the fuck up if you're not going to do anything. And I
Mm,
won't drag this out too much, but one thing that's remarkable about the Ukrainian people, when there's things they don't agree with, they don't talk about it. They fucking do stuff. And that's one
mm,
thing that back in 2014 scared Putin because he saw that not only did one of its closest neighbors have a revolution, it worked. And then after that, an opposition leader ran for president and won. These are all things Putin cannot allow in his country. So in Ukraine, when things are getting bad and they didn't agree with the course of where the government was going, they didn't just write tweets about it. They fucking murdered the police officers who were enforcing this. And it was violent, but that's how things get done if they need to change. I'm
mm.
very appalled about Roe v. Wade being overturned. I'm appalled by it. I'm also not in the United States. I think if people care as they should care, writing online isn't enough. You need to get violent. I'm not calling for violence. I'm saying if you care, that's how change is going to get done. America has shown that there's no such thing as realistic change. Not with Biden, not with the Democratic Party. They're spineless. They're not going to actually do anything. They're not going to cancel student loan debt. And I think Americans, as outraged as they might be, they're complacent. They have Starbucks, they have movie theaters, they have fast food. No matter how much debt they might owe or how many rights are taken away, they still have enough comforts to be like, well, do I really want to get killed today? Do I want to get beat in the back of the head by a billy club? Maybe not. I'm not that pissed. And it's those moments where it's like, well, maybe you should just shut the fuck up then. And that's
Mm.
not to say don't give a shit. I think giving a shit is good. But we're living in a time now where it's kind of like you either give a shit all the way or you don't say anything at all. These half measures don't work.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because I that's the justification for my I guess pacifism, just to be like, yeah, whatever. In that is the hope that if and when something happens, I won't just fuck around and share a hashtag or do that. Yeah, I'll be donating or protesting or doing something which I think can actually enact change. But yeah, it is just a kind of a question of the curse of comfort or laziness as you get older, or kind of just unwillingness to kind of risk any aspect of your health or wealth. Is will you kind of accept the call when it comes your way? I don't know. I feel like I could be a hypocrite as well. I could feel like, yeah, I'll be when my cause comes along, I'll be ready to take a stand, but maybe that's the fairy tale I tell myself when actually I'm a pussy. And I don't I don't intend to do. I intend to kind of like yeah, just kind of shirk things as much as possible, because I love shirking responsibility. I think that, the whole like never quit. I think if something sucks and you don't enjoy it, quit early, quit
Fucking
often.
quit. Get out of there.
So all these kind of like mottos, David Goggins, Jocko Willink, you gotta fucking earn it, all this stuff. I think that, like, honestly, I believe the opposite. Like, find your sweet, comfortable
Yeah.
spot and like lounge around in that area. Like, you want to kind of if you've only got a certain amount of time on the earth, you want to be doing things that jive with you and feel good. And so, yeah, I don't know how we ended up here,
Yeah,
but
no, but it's like, yeah, those guys are like, I run 95 kilometers a day. I have like the best body on earth. It's like, you have a great body, but to what end? Like, what part of any of this did you enjoy? Like, I
I
could
just
probably
picture
afford
you
to get
you're sitting, you're lying in a pool on like a floaty unicorn in a pool sipping on a daiquiri. You're like, "Yeah, well, you have a good body, but like, look at me, who's the happier guy right now?" He's like, "Ugh, I have an 8 pack."
It's like by the time we're 80, we're all gonna be fucked anyways. It's like,
Yeah,
who cares?
yeah, yeah. That's I don't know. It's fucked, man. Because it's weird. It's all this stuff. It's so easy to get locked inside your own head and wallow around in there and be like, yeah, like, who am I? Like, what really defines me? Should I change up the cargo shorts that I buy? Because I'm really feeling like there's some better options. You can kind of like devolve into this kind of solipsistic existence, which I generally find is kind of Patrick Bateman-esque. You start becoming obsessed by things and like, what is all this? It's all about me. And then I try and go the opposite sometimes and be like, right, time to form some connections and like do stuff with other people that I feel good about. And then like, oh yeah, Larry was 10 minutes late to softball. And I'm like, this is why I don't see people IRL. you can kind of just like fluctuate between being like managing the most minute details of your life or trying to like be a part of a community, and I find that both can be exhausting. So I think the state of flux is where I'll remain for the rest of my days.
I mean, I think there's worse mentalities to have.
Yeah. At least I'm not hurting anyone. I'm just judging everyone, including myself, nonstop.
That's the thing. I feel like the best rule of thumb is don't be malicious. Don't be a dick.
Yep. Good rule of thumb. Well, dude, I was thinking we do double episodes, but I'm fucking exhausted. So if it's cool with you, let's do my idea for a movie topic and riff next week or something, and we'll record.
Okay, because I am interested in that one, and I'll save my comment for the next time then.
Yeah, no, well, why don't we do a little teaser? Well, what's your comment? Because I was going to do Stephen Paddock, the perpetrator of the 2017 Las Vegas shooting. And I kind of wanted to talk to you about it because of the gun violence aspect of CoinciDATE. I thought you're obviously talking about school shootings there, but that there's somewhat of a crossover. And the fact that there's so much mystery with that case, the fact that he doesn't fit the profile of a shooter, and there appears to be no motive whatsoever. So there's just a very mysterious, eerie aspect to it, which I think is very fitting and kind of aligns with the whole kind of what's happening socially at the moment in America. But anyway, what are your immediate thoughts as the teaser?
I was going to say how at the hotel from which he shot at the crowd at, my sister was staying at that hotel as it happened.
Oh,
and
shit.
I went to the university that Elliot Rodgers shot up. But then I thought, being American who has a connection to a shooting isn't special. Like, there's nothing interesting about that.
It's like everyone's had COVID. Everyone knows he's had COVID at this point. Yeah.
If you're American, you could list off like three. It's just like, oh, yeah, I was getting my nails done when he came in and did this shooting, or as at this premiere when this shooting happened. And I was thinking, like, it's not even a funny or farcical statement. It's kind of just true.
Yeah, that's like for a skit, you could be like, oh, did you know that I kind of I went to the same college as Elliot Rodgers? And someone's like, well, I'm his brother. Or like, just people story topping like, yeah, no, I fucked him. Or no one fucked him. So that doesn't work. But no, that's going to be a juicy topic to sink into next week. But dude, this was so much fun. Sean Sono, according to Wikipedia, is embroiled in a Me Too scandal right now. So he could be done. The fact he's 60 years old.
This conversation, we're not in.
No, well, you didn't do it. It's Sean's thing he's got to deal with. But this movie's got to be made. So if anyone's got how much you said 100 million was too much. So give us 30 million. We'll get the right people involved. Yeah, exactly. But this is fun, dude. I'm just going to stop the recording now. Until next time, peace.